Do you think we're going to have a Trump baby boom? I've been thinking about this a lot. It seems like a thematic story that when I'm reading the news or checking social media seems to sort of be in the background. So I thought today I would make a slightly different video and kind of talk through the things that I'm finding or seeing online and what indications we have that the American population might push to have more children during Trump's time in office. And we can talk about what economic policies, but also what social influences might be driving this. So I've always been interested in pro-family culture and children. How do we care for them as a society, especially children who don't necessarily have people who are in a position to advocate for them, children in foster care. But the idea of a baby boom and our declining population and our potential collapsed birth rate came to the forefront of my mind this weekend after Riley Gaines, the women's sports advocate, announced at Turning Point's Young Women's Leadership Summit that she's expecting her first baby in September. That's so exciting. Congrats to Riley. She is actually one of a number of conservative influencers who has announced that she's expecting a baby or who have had a baby this year. I'm thinking of Candace Owen and Isabel Brown, both of whom had children relatively recently. Even celebrities like Rihanna, what is her name? Zara? Hold on one second. Okay, I'm going to show you this article listing celebrities who have announced that they're having children in 2025. So not only is it conservative influencers or spokespeople who are having children, it's also, as I mentioned, Rihanna and, the famous TikTok gravelly voice cooking lady influencer, I don't know what to call her, Nara Smith and her husband Lucky Blue. You've got people like Jessa Duggar, who was famous for being on 19 Kids and Counting. You've got Vanessa Kirby. You've got actresses. You've got reality TV people. I mean, there's just so many people who've announced that they're having children. Now, I held off from making a video like this for a minute because I thought maybe I was seeing the celebrity content because it's driven by the algorithm, but also just in my personal life, my friends, people I went to college with, announcing their pregnancies because I have reached that age, so to speak. A lot of people are married and they're starting their families. But culturally, we know actually that more people are opting not to have children. So for a minute, I felt like this is just something I'm seeing because of the circles I run in or because my social media feed has figured out this is something that I am interested in and engaging with. So they're driving more content to me. But I don't know that that's it, to be honest. So while I was seeing a lot of social media and celebrity content related to people having babies, I also have been noticing that this is becoming a more common topic in the news articles that I'm reading. And again, maybe this is the internet serving it to me, but I do think globally, there's an awareness that a declining population means long-term economic trouble. Not only do you not have a big enough workforce, you don't have enough people to care for your now larger elderly population. And the biggest example of this is Japan. So this is an article from AP News. It was published on June 5th, and the title is Japan's birth rate falls to a record low as the number of marriages also drop. So this links something important. In Japan, roughly 3% of children born are born to non-married parents. So something like 97% of children born in Japan are born to married parents. And in fact, while their birth rate is 1.3, which is very low, you need 1.2, or you need 2.1 to maintain your population. I think it's 2.3 to be growing. The birth rate for married people in Japan is something like 1.9. So parents who are people who are opting to get married are more likely to have more children overall, but there's a huge section of the population that's opting not to get married. So there's a relationship. We hear a lot about dinks, dual income, no kids, but it seems like in Japan, that doesn't mean that people are coupling up and pooling resources and opting not to have children, but having these partnered lives. And you'll hear stories in the West of people saying, Gen Z doesn't date, they don't drink alcohol, they're having less sex. They are somehow just more isolated socially, even from each other, than generations before them. Sorry, Gen Z, I'm not sure what I said there. This is from the AP News article. The data underscores Japan's longstanding issue of a rapidly aging and shrinking population, which has serious implications for the country's economy and national security, especially against the backdrop of China's increasingly assertive presence in the region. According to the latest statistics, Japan's fertility rate, the average number of babies a woman is expected to have in her lifetime stood at 1.2 last year. So that'd be 2024. The 727,277 babies born in Japan in 2023 were down 5.6% from the previous year, the ministry said, the lowest since Japan started compiling statistics in 1899. In articles like this one, and in articles written about South Korea, which has a similar, if not maybe more urgent, population crisis, they note that young women and men are opting not to have children or relationships. Now, for women, it's often more influenced by feminism. They want to stay in the workforce, or they feel like there's not a point to getting married. They don't benefit from it. And it's often described with men having sort of this social regression. They're living at home. They're not pursuing women. They're more interested in online activities. It seems like the sexes are just pulling apart. I wanted to find some data on American social patterns so that I could see whether or not we are following similar trends to Japan and South Korea. Anecdotally, we think we are, but obviously the cultures are unique and different, and so some of the driving forces might just be different. This is an article from the Pew Research Center. It was published in September of 2023, and it's titled The Modern American Family. They note that in their research in the 1970s, 67% of Americans ages 25 to 49 were living with their spouse and one or more children younger than 18, so presumably their children. So by the time they were between the ages of 25 and 49, the majority of Americans were not only married, but they had a young child, a child under the age of 18. In the last 5 decades, that share has dropped to 37%, according to Pew Research Center. And you can see it's 67% in the 70s, in the 90s, it's 47, in 2010, it's 39, and in 2021, when this data was pulled, it was 37%. In America, unlike Japan, there are people who have children and are not married or who cohabitate with kids. The Pew Research Center notes that in 2021, cohabitating with kids was about 5% of people, so presumably they share children, but they are not married. Unpartnered with kids, aka single people, 6%. Married with no kids was 21%. And cohabitating with no kids, so not married people without children, was 7%. And then 11% of people live with other family members. Additionally, between 1970 and 2021, the percentage of married Americans dropped from 69% to 50%. Nearly 20%, pretty significant. At the same time, the number of never married people rose from 17% to 31%. Again, changing the dynamics. And as we know from statistics and patterns in not just Japan, but also in America, married people tend to be the one having children. So if we have a population that is increasingly uninterested in marriage, it seems to indicate that they aren't opting to not get married and still have children. They are choosing to not get married and also not have children at all, meaning that the population has fewer people who are contributing to its growth. To me, that would mean that the people who are getting married would need to have larger families to support the difference in lifestyles, right? If we're going to be a society that it's like, if you don't have kids, no problem, it means that parents don't need to have just like 2 or 3 kids. They maybe need to have 4 or 5 to maintain or grow our population. I'm not an economic expert. That's just the way the math seems to work out to me. Now, there are a number of countries that are facing this issue, and they will institute different economic policies or social safety net type structures to encourage people to have families. So Scandinavia is famous for having these very long parental leaves, but women aren't having more children because of it. They just have the long leaves to encourage them. Some countries are offering financial benefits like tax breaks. Trump just announced these Trump accounts, these $1,000 savings accounts that parents can have for their children. They can contribute to, and the children can get basically paid out over their 20s. And I think they finally can take full control of it in their 30s. They can put it towards small businesses or education, and it's to incentivize people to have children, because one of the top complaints is that it's just not economically viable. I mean, one of the big criticisms of President Donald Trump when he was in the middle of his tariff negotiations with China was that some of the first things that would see price increases were baby items, strollers, high chairs, cribs, which are largely made abroad. You could put a pin in that and have a whole separate conversation about whether we should manufacture things abroad and tariffs and whatever. But I'm just talking about the fact that if you are someone who does want to have children and you're trying to run the numbers, how much is it going to cost me? If it's going to be too expensive, you'll have fewer children. You'll have one, you'll have two. But our population and our country, for economic stable growth, needs you to have more. So it does make sense to me that the government is now trying to say, how do we get involved in this? I don't know that government intervention is actually the only thing that will change, because like I said, Scandinavia has long maternity leave. France has offered different economic supports, and they are stabilizing their population growth maybe, but actually we're not seeing them have a huge turnaround. I don't know of a country, and I'll do my best to find one, that has had a dip and is now on the rebound, because that would be the country we need to study. What are they doing that is really making people have children? It's important to caveat here and say, a lot of times when you read papers about this, they'll say, well, the only way for a country to save themselves from a population collapse is to open the doors to immigration. Now, personally, I don't think that's a solution. You may increase your population, but you are sort of losing your culture and traditions. It's not the same thing as having a population that is conceiving and raising their own children if to just bring in people from somewhere else. I think that seems like not a solution that people are advocating for, and I think it ignores some of the cultural implications of not carrying down the traditions of your country and your language and your faith and your traditions. So to me, mass immigration is not a solution to this. You have to have something that encourages people to have children. So you have government interventions, economic policies, maternity leaves, tax breaks. Maybe they have subsidized daycare. Maybe they, one of the things that you hear about in Japan is that they're having people work for fewer days so that they can, they work 4 days a week so that they have an extra day to go date and meet someone and then have children. I don't know that that's working, but it's, it might take a couple of years before we see the long-term effects of some of those policies. I think it hits on the cultural aspect because these two issues seem to just butt up against each other. It's too expensive to have children, but also people are not connecting in a way that supports growing a family. So this is from the American Survey Center. They were researching the attitudes people have towards marriage, family, and procreation. They note that young adults are less likely to see the value in prioritizing marriage and having children. They note that 74% of adults age 18 to 29 say that it's just as well off. They are just as well off having other priorities than marriage and children. And 25% of 18 to 29-year-olds, so the youngest adult population, believe it's better for people to make marriage and having children a priority. That's a huge attitudinal shift. I mean, if you look at the oldest generation, 65 years and older, it's more divided. The majority still say it's better to have other priorities, which is probably an indication of why we are seeing a decline in population because it started generations ago. I think for the most part in America, the birth rate really started to drop off around 2007, from what I understand. 50 to 64-year-olds, 58% say it's just as well off to have other priorities. 30 to 49-year-olds, 62% of them say it. So this is where we're getting these larger majorities. And the youngest generation, again, 74%. Now, if these younger generations are saying we should have other priorities, I assume they're talking about work. Although we do have all this research out that younger generations, the youngest generation isn't pursuing any particular professional goals, that they aren't pursuing advanced degrees. It seems like they are kind of falling off the face of the earth. If they're not dating and they're not studying and they're not learning, I mean, what are they doing? What are their priorities? But it seems to me that this just as well off to have other priorities runs more deeply than an economic fear. It's not even an environmental issue. I mean, there was at one point a lot of people arguing, oh, well, we shouldn't have children because the planet's going to, disintegrate, so we can't leave it to them. This deep-seated, there should be other priorities seems to indicate that they don't see the joy in having children or marriage. And that's sad. Now, maybe it's a population that's been raised on the fact that, what do they say? 50% of marriages end in divorce, even though from what I understand, that statistic is slightly off because you could have someone who never gets divorced and you could have someone who is divorced 3 times, which would kind of throw that off. They would be overrepresented in that statistic. But again, different video. I think the idea that the youngest generation is simultaneously saying there should be other priorities and they're also not seemingly pursuing very much else, means that we have cultural apathy. That means that we are not enjoying our lives in America on this planet. And you do see that, I think, in some of the civil unrest and some of the desire to be a part of more progressive protests that have broken out over the last couple of years. But I would wonder if our culture is playing on the anxiety that people have about children, whether it be, am I going to be a good enough parent, or is it right for me to have children when there's so much wrong with the world? To bring this all full circle, because you're watching me meander through researching this, I think it's really fascinating that you have people proudly posting that they are having children, like Riley Gaines, like Candace Owens, like Isabel Brown, and like all of the influencers and celebrities I mentioned. They're saying we are having them because we enjoy them and children are good. And I wonder if normalizing having children, and I've talked about this in different videos with JD Vance. He's got the vice president of the United States has these 3 young children who walk off his plane with him, and he talks about them in a delighted voice. If you had more people in popular culture on TV, in your social media feed, who are having children, who are being celebrated by their communities, people are throwing them baby showers and they're having gender reveals or whatever it is, if we would bring back some of the inherent joy. Because I think parenthood is a ton of work and there is a lot of sacrifice and there is, the fear of, can you provide for them and what world am I bringing them into? But it's sort of the be scared and do it anyways mentality. Is there a way we could glamorize or at least bring a more positive attitude towards marriage and parenthood? Can we get rid of what I think is kind of the boomer generation inherited like anxiety and fear over it? Maybe, maybe not. And the other question is, can we do it fast enough to turn around our declining birth rate? Let me know what you guys think. This has been a little bit rambly, but I am curious to see the signs of a Trump baby boom. I don't think you would start to see them, the early indications, until probably about this time next year when we have the data on the birth rate from 2025. So Trump's got 4 years. Let's see if there is, in fact, a Trump baby boom. Thanks to all of you who have subscribed. Thanks to you guys who keep coming back and checking out my content. Let me know what you think about this or any other topics. I'd be curious to hear what you want to hear about later this week. Bye, guys. Have a great day.